So hi to everyone, welcome to this QA unit interview. So today I'm really happy to have João Proença with us. He is in fact answering also to a small challenge, and you may see he's teasing on Twitter around the quality engineering definition interview. So I'm very happy that we are able to do that. Hello João.
Hi Antoine, how's it going?
I'm okay. I see you are also a music player, but I probably with a
Yes.
guitar behind you, but I let you introduce you a bit about what you do, what you like, etc. I think it's always interesting
Yes.
to know you better.
So my name is João Proença. I come
Mhm.
from Lisbon, Portugal.
Yeah.
I am a quality engineer at OutSystems.
Mhm.
Over the years, I've done various different things. And music was actually one of them at some point. So I started my career as a researcher in 3D rendering when I finished up
Mhm.
university. It was interesting. I mean, I was doing 3D renderings of objects and figuring out new ways of drawing stuff. But after a while, I figured that doing academic research, sometimes you're just doing things just for the sake of it. It doesn't really get applied in anything in the real world, and that kind of bothered me. So after a short while, I decided to do something else. And
Mhm.
I ended up becoming a quality assurance engineer at the time at OutSystems. In those days, it was like the regular quality assurance thing where I was inside what we would like to call an agile team,
Mhm.
and I was the tester in the team
Mhm.
basically, and I was both manual testing and also producing automation. I stayed in that position at OutSystems R&D for like 5 years, which allowed me to do a lot of different things,
Mhm.
not just QA. I did a bit of development. I did bug fixing, maintenance, you name it. But after a while, after those 5 years, I was a bit fed up with the whole quality thing, and I was like, I don't want to do this
Mhm.
anymore, and I don't want to come back to the world of quality. This is a dead end.
Yeah.
Um, and then I was basically invited to do other stuff. So I became a developer.
Oh, cool.
Afterwards, I went to work at the customer support team, which was really a really
Enriching, I assume.
enriching experience, having to pick up phones and talk to customers, angry
Mhm.
customers sometimes,
Yeah.
sometimes happy customers,
Yeah.
figuring out what was going on, what things needed to be escalated inside.
Mhm.
Work at the time, given the size of the company, that was really much an elite position because you had to do a whole bunch of different things. So there was
Mhm.
just one line of support. You didn't
Yeah,
have
it was very diverse, and yeah, you had to
exactly,
understand a lot about the entire organization to understand when the problem is coming, how to fix them.
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And then after that, because it went so well, I was invited to form the first cloud operations team. This was
Mhm.
in 2013 when my company OutSystems came up with the first cloud offering. And hey, we need an operations team, so let's start with João.
Mhm.
And so I was on the ops side of things. At the same time, as you can see by the guitar there, I was
Mhm.
also doing some things in music. When you have your own solo music project, you end up having to market a lot your
Mhm.
own music. I started getting interested in marketing, and I
Mhm.
got an opportunity at another company to join the product marketing team. So I went
Mhm.
in and did that for a while. So I was basically the engineer inside the product marketing team, producing
Mhm.
producing contents for another product software company.
Mhm.
Then I came to the conclusion after a while that I was an engineer at heart and I wanted to come back to engineering.
Mhm.
Came back to
Yeah.
OutSystems engineering because the challenges were really interesting. And afterwards, I was invited again to come back to quality. And I was like, hey, I told you I didn't want to come back. And they were like, no, the way we're looking at quality now is
It's
completely
different.
different.
Yeah, okay.
And they didn't have a name for it at the time, but they were
Mhm.
actually talking about in my book is quality engineering. And so I've been a quality engineer since 2017 now, and I've seen a lot, and that's basically it.
Yeah, okay, no, it's interesting because also just to share also with the listener, our system have scaled a lot in the recent years. So I assume you have all the concrete challenges of high scaling product, and it's also a software product. It's very interesting. I think that your product is a software product for engineers. So I think
Yeah, and to be honest, it's like so I've been at the company on and off, but I already have a lot of years under my belt, and well, I remember the days when the company had less than 100 employees, and right now we have more than 1,500 or 2,000. I don't know exactly where we stand right now.
Okay.
So I've seen various different stages and degrees of size.
Yeah, exactly. And
You know?
different problems, different type of also growth of the company and mindset. So yeah.
Yeah.
And one reason also I think interesting that we discussed today is that my perspective, my personal, is that quality engineering sometimes is not that well defined. And I wanted also to, with your experience, because you're also an active speaker in the world of quality, it was also to know from your, so concretely, before we digging it more, quality engineering, etc., it's today in your position, so you are a principal quality engineer, what are your top priorities that you are addressing?
Well, so you've already touched on one big fact of our life, which is we are inside a highly scaling organization, and things are getting bigger and bigger and fast.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that we have, one of the big challenges that we have, is that we're trying to make the quality practice scale, because I mean, lots of new teams being formed up, and trying to figure out, given our view of quality, and of course we're subscribers of the whole team approach to quality mindset, how can we make sure that quality is not a silo thing, where each team kind of has its own things, but actually everyone is benefiting from a practice and from a I wouldn't say standard, but the what we see as the most advisable way of doing things, and most notably, how can teams think to themselves about quality? Okay. And that, of course, I'm I work with a specific team, but I'm slowly transitioning into a role where I kind of like, instead of working directly with one team, I'm overseeing a group of teams.
Yeah. Okay.
And then those teams may or not have quality engineers inside. And kind of like I'm helping teams. I'm kind of like making teams communicate with one another, make different quality engineers aware of what each other is doing, and figuring out opportunities for collaboration, you know, and sometimes even addressing topics that may be a bit more overarching, that may go beyond just one team or something like
exactly,
that.
A bit more global.
It is, it's a more strategic role, and also gets me more on the side of keeping up with the trends and making sure that quality is being built in all of these teams, you know.
Yeah, it's like you need to make sure quality is an enabler at a local level, at every context and every team, but at the same time that it contributes to a more global, harmonized quality capability for the company. Okay. Yeah, but it already demonstrates a very good level of maturity of quality in organization, because yes, I understand. We see a lot of companies with a local quality or one guy in quality with facing, I don't know many engineers. So yeah, we know there will be a problem. So yeah, but it's also interesting to note that.
Nevertheless, we are hiring.
Yeah.
We need more people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, but it's also interesting is what you say in your objective is you are there to also support the scaling of the organization, enable I would say, a positive onboarding of new people while they maintain the quality of the product, etc. So yeah.
And also helping, one of the things that I find myself doing a lot is helping quality engineers working more closely with specific teams in in kind of like, I think that a lot can be done, not by the technical aspects of things, but more on the human aspects of things. So I try to do a lot of coaching of even other quality engineers in the sense of how do you approach specific quality problems inside the context of
methodology
a
and
team.
thinking.
Exactly. Yeah, sometimes the way you facilitate a session with the rest of the team, because quality engineers working inside teams are very much facilitators and enablers, they're not like the person who is doing the quality tasks. That's not the goal for us. And doing that sort of enablement and knowing how to facilitate a good session around something, around risk, around a testing strategy, or I don't know. I mean, the way you facilitate things can be a game changer, you know. And so sometimes that has a lot to say.
And if we try to get out, we'll not try, we'll forget for a time the out-system direct experience, I would say. And if you had to define quality engineering, so in one sentence or a few words, what would be the definition for you?
So in my view, well, I will try to define quality engineering as best as I can, given the context where I come from, and it's important to understand. Of course, that I come from the what I like to call I'm rooted in the school of testing, of the whole team the whole team approach and the modern testing principles that have been started by Brett Jensen and Alan Page. Actually, when I became a quality engineer at OutSystems back in 2017, I did it while working with the new head of quality, who was João Proença, and he came from Microsoft, where Alan and Brent came up with this whole movement about the modern testing principles and the whole team approach to testing. So he came in to kind of like to bring that school of thought inside to our organization, and that's where I come from. And what was interesting at the time is that the way we were approaching quality, of course, we could talk, if we wanted to bring up a reference of something, I would talk about the modern testing principles to other folks. But one day I believe it was in 2018, and I went to Agile Testing Days in Germany. And I started seeing that people were talking about the same sorts of things. And there was a keynote by Anne-Marie Charette from Australia, New Zealand. Yeah. Please forgive me, Anne-Marie, if I think it's Australia. From where she basically said, what's happening right now in a keynote, she said, what's happening right now, it's basically quality engineering, which is something that came from other engineering fields and is kind of pervading now into the software world. And in my view, I think that quality engineering comes at this time pretty much because we have the DevOps movement, and it's something that's linked to DevOps and to agile processes. Whereas before, and of course, I mean, I'm going to start defining quality engineering by comparing it with quality assurance. But quality assurance tends to be more focused in quality validations post-implementation. It's something that's very localized in the software lifecycle. Quality engineering brings for me, it brings us a more holistic view of quality, where building quality in may mean different things at different stages of the software engineering cycle, let's call it. There's a very interesting visual that for me is kind of akin to this way of thinking from Dan Ashby, where basically, you know, like you have the infinity sign of DevOps. You know, where you're going through the whole stage and it all exactly. And basically it's like, whereas before you had like, maybe you considered the cycle and you said testing fits here. Now you have the infinity loop, and quality happens here, and testing happens here, in all positions. So you can think about quality when you're in design stages. You can think about quality when you have to test. You can think about quality when you're in production, when you have to learn from production. And so the way you approach quality, of course, it's heavily rooted in testing as a way of, in my book, to mitigate risk and to learn about the product, but it doesn't stick only to that. It's much more encompassing. You have a much more holistic, a bigger, more holistic view of quality, let's say.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So I had a question on differences with QA, but you ended up explaining, and it's interesting to know all the background of the reasoning that lead you there. So yeah. So, and if you had, for example, to define some common practices of quality engineering, what would be? So we discussed some, but what are for you the most differentiating one or added value, I would say?
Well, so I can't say that there's like a recipe that fits all, you know. I can only talk about my experience, but I can think about a number of things I've exercised as a quality engineer that I didn't used to see as something that would be falling under my wing when I was doing quality assurance. So first, quality considerations since the design phase, right? Like I was explaining before. And in my view, exactly. And in my view, for instance, I'm very risk driven. So I think that one of the things that baffled me when I was getting into this new quality engineering life was that people talk about risk, and most concretely quality risk, because a lot of times you talk about risk and people will be talking about project risks, which is something which is a bit different. But when you talk about quality risks, we're talking about other things. It's about what can go wrong, or in which ways may our product not fulfill the expectations of our users, etc. And with and for me, I saw a lot of discussions around risk, but I didn't see a lot of discussions on how exactly do you think about risk, you know, and not even if I wanted to go ahead and think of a formal way of assessing risk, I didn't see anything about that. So I started learning a little bit about risk storming. And risk storming for me and risk assessments, let's call it, something that should be at the heart of a lot of the quality work that one does. And I see this as something that you usually try to activate early before any sort of line of code is done. So I've introduced risk storming at our organization, and one of the things that we found with experience is that, and I've even like kind of discussed this with the creators of risk storming, Marcel van Galen and Baron van Dijl, is that you can do risk storming really at the beginning, like only when you have an idea for something new, you know, and you'll have lots of space to kind of like consider the risks that you're identifying further down the line in the project. But usually the exercise is very poor because you still don't know exactly what you're building. When you're already too far ahead and you're implementing, you'll have a lot of ideas regarding risk, but you'll have little space to accommodate mitigating that risk, because you already have a plan, you already have deadlines or whatever, and that makes things more difficult. So for us, the sweet spot is right when you already know a little bit, you've already discovered a little bit about what you're going to create, but you haven't yet start creating it. And this is a very important phase for me to do these sorts of risk assessments, where we take the whole team and we collectively try to get these risks emerging, try to figure out which risks we see as the most dangerous ones, and then put together how can we mitigate these. A lot of times that implies a lot of things, that implies a lot of testing, but a lot of times it implies other things. It implies maybe we could test stuff in production. When I say testing in production, I'm usually not thinking about let's release something to production and we could conduct the tests there, but it's more like doing shadow deployments, which is, I don't know if it's something that the audience here will understand, but shadow deployment is something where like you kind of, if you have a service running in production, you are going to release a new version of that service that adds new functionality or something. You just put them both working in production. The old one is serving users. The second one is just creating data and then you throw it away. It's not like doing anything to production, but you can already figure out if if it's behaving as you expect or not. And this is one of the a good example of what testing in production means. And so other things like observability, being able to react fast because you can observe very efficiently things in production, and that has an impact over risk, of course. Release engineering, I mean, if you think about controlled rollouts, appropriate feature flagging, being able to roll out a feature progressively to your user base, that's also a way of mitigating risk. And so all of these different things are already going beyond just testing. There are other ways that you can mitigate risk. Another thing that I found myself in the recent past doing a lot, in which is kind of like is even some of the highlights of my work in recent years have been at the architecture level, where basically I look at the problem in the architecture of our system, and I work with architects in the sense that, hey, I can spend months testing this thing, but
there's no way
it will be way better to mitigate certain risks if we fix this in the architecture. So let's figure out how we can do that. And that usually is a problem that is like about the what, then the how, and then the when, which is like, we need people working on this. And usually that's the most difficult one, you know? And so as you can see, I'm already talking a lot of different things that I've done in the quality engineering engineering sense, that if you had like a test automation team or a quality team, maybe like you had before, maybe this wasn't exactly the sorts of things you would see coming out of that unit, right?
Yeah, it's a much more global perspective than the part you were saying about early. So yeah, we could say a QA team can challenge a bit the specification, etc., but up to the point of digging into the architectures and thinking about DevOps, etc., it's a step after.
And even and then there's another part that for us, because of the things that I've already told you before, of the context of where we are right now at OutSystems Engineering, is that, I mean, a lot of the work that I'm doing is with teams, helping teams like kind of like draw out their own path towards high quality and being performance in terms of quality and building quality in. And so I think that in retrospect, some of the things we have been trying to do over the last year is making teams understand two things: is what quality means to them, which is more related to the habits and the processes of the qualities of the teams themselves. And then what quality means to their product, in the sense of, I mean, I work with teams that have parts of our product. We have component teams, and so what does quality mean for your components?
How does it translate and cascade from the global quality perspective?
Exactly, and what would high quality mean for that product, and what does quality mean for your team? And with that, we have been exercising ways of kind of like deriving some metrics that can help them in their own context regarding their own assets, how to evaluate where they stand in terms of quality and where they want to be headed, but also in terms of the team's habits and processes. Something that we borrowed from Alan Page, the creator of the modern testing principles, is that a couple of years ago he came up with he shared publicly something he calls the what was it called? The quality. Let me just recover the name, because we changed the name in our own instance. It was the Quality Culture Transition Guide. Okay, so it's something that you can figure out online. You can just search for it, or we'll share the links afterward. There's lots of links to share of a number of things I've already told you. But the Quality Culture Transition Guide that he came up with is like, okay, let's look at quality in various different perspectives, and you're going to see stuff like testing breadth, which is like the how wide or how complete is your different tools of testing that you have available to you. Do you know how to do exploratory testing? Do you know how to do performance testing? Do you only do unit testing, or do you only do end-to-end testing? So it's that sort of evaluation. test ownership, quality culture. I think there are a few in there. Basically, we took that idea and we adapted it to our own context. And so we started adding some others like observability, like stuff regarding support and maintenance. Yeah. We have a team that knows how to do support and knows how to handle the maintenance issues that they have. Tech debt, to have a team that is thinking actively about tech debt and promoting in a qualified way the tech debt that they need to address and allocating time to do it. So all of these things is we are using the same model. So using an assessment, we call it the quality radar, because you basically build a radar chart with this. It's not used to evaluate teams. It's used for teams to evaluate themselves, and then it makes it really clear for teams to like, hey, I'm sorry for the expression, we suck at observability. Yeah, what can we do? Yeah, we suck. What can we do to at least not suck in observability? Oh, here's the first step. So here's the first thing we should do.
Your maturity steps.
Next level. Exactly. And this then makes it much more clear and much easier for teams to figure out, okay, these are the next things that we can do. So let's try and figure out how we should do them. Yeah. And so these are the sorts of things we have been trying. This is the sort of work that I've been also trying to do with teams. Some of these ideas are still a bit experimental, like what I've just described, but nevertheless, you always get something out of it.
And the model is this one. So you have a frame of reference, quality, maturity model, and steps to progress based on your assessment and own priorities. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's very interesting. It made me think about a common question around normally quality engineering is there to deliver value, but if we need to deliver value, we need also to be able to measure the gap of value we are delivering. So then comes the question, how do we measure, what do you measure in quality engineering? So I understand some part, there is probably some global and localized indicator, and I don't think probably there is a one-size-fits-all answer because some part depend on the context, but what is your perspective on measuring the value of quality engineering?
I think that there are two main ideas in my head regarding metrics and measuring. Okay, I think that metrics that are not contextualized to the organization, the software at hand, the product or whatever that is at hand, and the teams that are involved. I mean, if metrics that are not contextualized to that usually do not work, okay? Or basically, there is not one size fits all in terms of the metrics that you want to use, okay? So I think that's why we try to kind of like steer the discussion and the decision making around what metrics matter the most to the teams and their own context.
Yeah.
One of the things that we tried doing there, something that we call the product quality goals, which basically is like, what would be the high level top metrics that would
metrics we need to aim at?
No, that would allow you to measure if your product is a high quality one or not, or is achieving the bar of high quality that you want.
Okay.
This is a very hard exercise to do. If you're already doing something akin to what's it called? Let me just give you North Stars. If you're already using North Stars, which are so if you check online what North Stars means, it's basically like some specific metrics from where a lot of metrics
like
can
the
derive.
Accelerate report with high elite performers, etc. So yeah.
But they're only metrics. So North Stars, if in theory there are only metrics, they're not values for those metrics. But for issue, I remember seeing that Facebook had a public, or someone shared what was the ultimate North Star of Facebook. I'm not exactly sure which one was it, but it was something like the number of likes or the number of times the average user went online, or so something like that.
Or something like that, yeah, okay.
Exactly, but it's a metric that guides your decision making, okay? And it's taking that concept, applying it to quality, and then it becomes, once you know of course, it's hard, and sometimes it's not just one metric. And this is a very experimental thing on our part. We're still learning from this idea, but it's like if you figure out at least a few metrics that you kind of think really matter to you. Okay, so measure where you are right now, and try to figure out where you would like to be, and now start unrolling the things that you would like to do to achieve that. Okay, so this is not perfect. Yeah. I've seen this working better in a few situations, worse in others, especially when the assets that the team owns change a lot over time. But I think I'm really fond of the idea that you try to make the team come up. You don't provide the metrics to the team. You provide them with the way to achieve those, to define those metrics. Okay. But then, and because of this sort of like let's say a discovery that I have been doing with other fellow quality engineers in my team, at some point I was working on this with Lisa Crispin when she was with us at OutSystems. And more than that, I think that I started talking with a lot of people from the community around metrics. And one thing I started noticing is that people kind of like agreed on this idea that metrics that fits all organizations, usually that sort of thing does not exist. But if there's any sort of standard of metrics that in most organizations will be very useful for you in various different ways, those are the DORA metrics. So the metrics that you get from the Accelerate book, they're basically considered the DevOps metrics by now. And in my book, given that I'm really rooted in DevOps and really rooted in the modern testing principles, I believe that if you want to start from some metrics that the industry gives us, those are the metrics that you should learn about, and you can probably learn about your own organization by starting to measure them inside. So I just told you that there isn't a recipe for this, and I gave you a small hint of a recipe.
No, it's interesting. Also, part of the answer, it's a bit like other methodology of quality engineering, is that you don't have all the answer. You must need to train people on the methods and how to solve problem. And also, the point you were saying, a big part of the job of a quality engineer is not only about technology and engineering.
And one thing I would like to add to that is that, so I regarding metrics and trying to measure things, even the way people self-organize around how do you organize quality engineering, right? That really depends on context as well. It depends on the organization that you have, the size, the history of the organization. I mean, OutSystems has been around for 20 years. That's different than when you're running even a very successful startup that only has like 2 years of existence.
Maybe in some smaller companies, the CTO can act as the first quality engineer, and then they expand. But, it's more a question of mindset and what you do. What do you accept or not accept?
Exactly. So given that, so you need to take into account the size, the history, the nature of the product or the software that you have, the maturity of the organization, and I remember even talking to a friend of mine, Melissa Eden, that she comes from, she works at Unity, where basically Alan Page works now. And of course they have the whole team, modern testing thing. And of course, that is where the school is at right now. And one of the things that she told me is that from an organizational perspective, they were also really pushing for teams to come up with the metrics that they found were best, It was also a model that they were exercising in figuring out how you could work with that model, have the teams being accountable for the metrics that they were going to follow when it came to quality. Because, I mean, metrics can be dangerous, but at the same time, they can be empowering, because if a team knows how to just, hey, these metrics matter to us because of this, of that, and that other thing. Yeah. And if you want quality to be better, then we need to improve these metrics. And these are the ways we believe that these are the experiments that we can put in place that we believe may give us some benefits in terms of those metrics. And when you start having these conversations in certain organizations, it just makes things easier for them to happen, you know?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and I was reflecting also on that in companies, so all companies are in digital transformation or adoption, etc. And I was wondering, when should companies start about quality engineering practice? So I start to see the answer. It's probably when you start to have the size that justifies this, and it's probably not an option for companies that want really to accelerate or at least have a quality product. Is it your perspective? It's becoming a requirement for companies to adopt quality engineering. So being a conclusion is that larger companies that does not have should care about it soon.
Well, I don't. I think that quality engineering. I think that quality engineering makes sense in basically most of the scenarios. Okay, it's not just about the size of the company. You know, if that was the question, I think that if you want to kickstart a successful startup tomorrow, you don't want to like start with quality assurance and then progress to quality engineering. You want to start with quality engineering right from the start, or at least having those principles and ideas behind that. You know, I sometimes find myself thinking that quality assurance ideas and principles made more sense back in the old days, where basically you couldn't do much about production once you reached production. You know, when you were producing big blobs of software that went out in a CD or a DVD, and once it was running, I mean, unless you went in there and patched things up, you couldn't do much. And if you were and back in the day, if you were building a rocket ship, you couldn't exactly go to the moon and patch things there, you know. So back in those days, it made a lot of sense to deal with risk in a way that is akin to quality assurance, you know. But nowadays, with different dynamics and different ways of engineering software and relating to your users and your customers, and that's why DevOps has emerged. Quality assurance in the traditional way doesn't cut it, but quality engineering is something that makes more sense, you know?
Yeah. So, and if you had to summarize a bit the key takeaways of this on quality engineering, what would be for you, for the listeners, key takeaways of quality engineering?
So I think that, as I say, I'm a big proponent of a whole team approach to testing. And I'm a big fan of the modern testing principles school, as I like to call it. So if people want to check that out, please do. If you want to learn more about it, sometimes you will find people that say, "Oh, I've heard about that, but I'm not really sure if it works well in practice." It does. It can work well in practice, and in a lot of places in this world, more places than we would imagine, it's actually what's happening. But then people just don't call it that. It's just people will just say. I know a lot of people will say, "Oh, I basically do the same as you, but I've never called it that way or whatever." But it's happening a lot, and this is something. Just a small tangent here is that I think that this is something that happens a lot with a lot of emerging practices in our field. Is that sometimes new things come up, and you'll see a lot of people saying, "Oh, it looks nice in theory, but in practice, I've never seen it working." Recently, for instance, if you want a practical example, I've had to delve into contract testing, okay, and using pacts for contract testing. I've seen a lot of people talk with excitement about contract testing. I went into workshops, I watched talks at conferences, but then I would speak to a few folks that would say, "Yeah, it looks very good, but I've never seen it working in practice." And I was, at some point I was like, "Hey, maybe I should pay attention to this, because sometimes things may look good in theory, but then you can't apply them in practice. But then eventually I spoke with a friend of mine, Rob Meany, who told me, oh, no, I've seen it working in practice. And so don't listen to the detractors, of course, that you need an organization that's really invested to doing that. It's a little bit like TDD, where a lot of people will tell you, if you want to build products right, and if you want to have an amazing quality culture, nurture TDD. But TDD is very hard to learn and master in an organization. And so you find lots of places where it wasn't successful. And so if people are wondering if this whole team approach to testing, in which, in my view, quality engineering is very well rooted, if people think that that's easier said than done, well, there are more and more organizations in the world practicing that. Quality assurance, you can still do a lot of the things that you used to do in a quality assurance sense, but quality engineering is more overarching. It's more holistic, and it gives, in my view, it gives us more options on ways to address risk.
Type of choices and actions we could take, and
So I would summarize, if I had to summarize heavily, I would summarize it like this.
Okay. And a last question is that we shared already a lot of content around quality testing and about bit you shared, the background and inspiration you have. But do you have any specific, I don't know, quotes or something, someone that it inspire you, and it can be outside of quality? So interesting to know that inspire you, more.
So we're talking about posts, blogs.
Exactly.
So, well, the modern testing principles, of course, it's something you can look up online. Alan and Brent, they hold a podcast that you can, as hundreds of episodes that you can follow right now, the A/B testing podcast, and there's also a Slack space that you can join and talk to other folks about stuff. I was mentioning Anne-Marie's Charrette's keynote on quality engineering, and she has been going a lot into this topic. There's two things that you can check out. The keynote is actually available online on YouTube. So you can look for a keynote called "Is Your Quality on the Road to Nowhere?" Okay. And she also has a very nice blog where she has posted a number of posts specifically related to quality engineering. More than this, the Accelerate book, because I was talking about tutorial metrics and whatnot. And another one, I will just, it's like, I haven't read the book yet, but everyone I respect and I know recommend it. And people say, with the things that you do, you need to read that book, which is Leading Quality by, I don't remember the name of the authors right now. What are the names? I will say it now. So from O.A. Spear and Ronald Cummings John. And from what I've heard, it's like one of the things I need to read next. But I will probably try to read that after reading the Unicorn Project, which is probably the book I'm going to read now.
Yes, the follow-up of the Phoenix Project.
Yes, exactly.
It's more entertaining with the romance style and the stories.
Yeah. So these are a few contents that will be very helpful for people to follow up.
Okay, but thanks a lot, João. Very nice sharing on quality engineering. So I wish you a very good journey of quality engineering at OutSystem, and I know you are with upcoming talks also on cognitive biases, another interesting topic. So
let's see how.
There will be the link of Twitter, etc., to follow João. But
let's see how cognitive biases tie in to quality engineering.
Exactly. Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Antoine. See ya.
Thanks for your interest in the field of quality engineering. You can find more content on QAunit.com. Stay tuned for the next episode. Bye bye.